Well, you are listening to the Meeting House here on Faith Radio, and it is the first day of February. That means that Valentine's Day is, well, essentially less than 2 weeks away, February the 14th. We know that. Stacey Morgan is here to really inspire us. A love story, a very unique love story. Is the situation essentially, Stacey, is when, you hear people saying that their husband or their wife, their spouse is off on business. Well, when your husband is on a business trip, well, he's maybe a few thousand miles away and not even on planet Earth, because your husband, Drew Morgan, is an astronaut. You have a forthcoming book called The Astronaut's Wife: How Launching My Husband into Outer Space Changed the Way I Live on Earth. Stacey Morgan, let me welcome you to the Meeting House here on Faith Radio, and happy February.
Thank you. Happy February to you. Happy to talk about all the love things. And yes, definitely some unique relationship situations my husband and I have found ourselves in.
So tell me this, how long have you and Drew been married?
We've been married for 21 years. We met in undergrad, and he is an Army officer. So we have had a lot of unique times in our marriage between deployments and moving to different places, around the country every time we got stationed at a new base. And then, of course, coming down here to Texas when he got picked up by NASA to become an astronaut. And then in 2019, he launched to the International Space Station for 9 months. And so that was definitely a unique and challenging season, but had as many opportunities as it did challenges.
So was perhaps being an astronaut, was that something that was on his radar when the two of you met and got married?
No, we joke about that when the day he came to me in 2012 and told me that he was very excited that they were going to be accepting applications for a new class of astronauts. He kind of, he said it, and I said, well, I wanted to be a ballerina when I was a kid, but that ship has sailed, right? Why are you telling me this? This is crazy, because we were all in. He is still active duty, but certainly we were all into the military lifestyle. That is all we'd known. That's all our kids had known. And so this was a complete departure from what we expected, what I expected as a spouse. I think what our kids expected as military kids. And so that was a readjustment. Certainly something I'm sure he would say he'd always been interested in, but not something that he had necessarily steered our career, or that we had steered our family life, trying to aim towards.
And give us an idea, because I know that the two of you have lived a rather exciting life, and God has sustained your marriage, your love for each other. But Drew has been involved in special forces. There's some skydiving involved. There are a lot of adventure. It's been a rather adventurous relationship, hasn't it?
I think on paper we look like big risk takers. It looks like both of us have a lot of risk, that I accept a lot of risk, in our family life, because of course, every time he goes somewhere, like a lot of couples, right? When one parent goes, the other parent is at home caring for the kids and kind of keeping the rest of life going on as normal. And so there's a risk, not just to the person who leaves and goes and does those dangerous things, but there's a risk to the person who's back at home, because if something goes wrong, it's the person at home who's going to need to carry on and kind of hold everything together and manage all of that. Now, in reality, I would say we are good. We are not risk lovers, but we are good risk assessors. And I think that's an important distinction, because I think people assume that risk means danger, or kind of being flippant about, your life or your finances, or that it's something to be avoided. And I think we've learned through a lot of the different and unique seasons we've been in that the world is risky, whether you acknowledge it or not, and that there are many things that are worth risking for, and that we all risk every day, whether you drive on the highway or you eat expired yogurt or whatever it is that is risky that we don't even think about. it's not always, and it's not just jumping out of airplanes or starting a business or moving across the country that's risky. There's a lot of different things you can do that are risky. And it's about assessing them and saying like, yeah, this is worth risking for. And I think we've learned there's a lot of things worth risking for, whether that's supporting your country, the call of duty to the nation, risking things for your faith, risking things for the sake of your children or your marriage, or just risking not knowing what God has in store in your next step, but knowing that that is the path he's put you on. And you're going to trust that it feels risky, but that God is going to be there with you when you take that step.
Stacey Morgan is joining us today here on the Meeting House on Faith Radio. She is a women's ministry leader. She's been doing that for over 15 years, an executive leadership coach for MOPS International. She also is the author of this new book, forthcoming book called The Astronaut's Wife. And you said something there, Stacey, that I wanted you to elaborate on. I'm going to actually return your words to you here.
Sure.
You're saying something about things that are worth it, that are worth taking risks for. And you included your family, your marriage, your relationship with your kids. I'm kind of elaborating here, but generally when we think about our marriages, the children that God has entrusted to us, I wanted you to elaborate on that whole concept about these people that God has given to us as gifts and the worthiness of really being willing to risk certain things for them. These are people who are worth it, right?
Absolutely. I mean, I think any soldier would tell you, and we've learned this firsthand through deployments, when a soldier goes overseas and is fighting, they are fighting for the person next to them. They're fighting for their family back home. They are risking it all, more so for those they love than, any kind of cause or political reason. And that's true in real life too. I mean, we love our children, we love our spouses. And sometimes, the world around us says, well, you may love them, but your job is most important, or your financial stability is most important, or, staying in the same place where things are under control and feel comfortable. That's most important, even though we know in our heart of hearts, it's harming our marriage, it's harming our family, that God is calling us to something else, that feeling of comfort and just being scared of the unknowns, it makes us not take advantage of the opportunities that God puts in front of us. And so there have been more times than I can count where I have had to say, I believe God is calling my husband to go do this thing, and there is a risk that he may not come home from that. And I have to trust that if the worst thing happens and he does not come home, God will be with me. Doesn't mean life's not going to be hard. Doesn't mean that I might not need some counseling or have to reassess life and some choices and priorities, but if God is calling him to that, if that is our path, then I have to trust that God's going to be with us. And the same with our kids, right? Like we put our kids on these paths and we kind of hope for the best. And then we hit these bumps in the road and we think like, oh, well, I trusted God until I hit this bump. And now all of a sudden I'm going to try to wrestle back some control because letting them continue down this path feels very risky. Especially now that I have a high school senior who's about to graduate and kind of go off on his own life, it feels like a huge risk to launch him into the world where I no longer am his primary voice in his ear anymore. But we need to do that. We have to trust that God's got him. God is going to be with him. And there is most definitely risk involved, and he will make mistakes and he will have to, reorient himself, I'm sure, a few times, but that's part of his journey too. And it's full of risk. And I don't want him to be afraid to take risks. So as a parent, I also want my kids to see me take risks, and that it doesn't have to be something to be avoided. Actually, taking risk is something I think God calls us to do more often than maybe we want to acknowledge.
Stacey Morgan joining us today. She has written a book called The Astronaut's Wife, How Launching My Husband into Outer Space Changed the Way I Live on Earth. All right, Stacey, I want you to take us to that moment. And of course, speaking as a layperson here, you basically said goodbye to your husband. He ascended into a rocket And he actually launched into outer space, as the subtitle of the book suggests. He was heading for 9 months on the International Space Station. So take us to that initial moment where you actually said goodbye to Drew to go into outer space, and then how God met you at that point and did as we might say, a transformational work in your life.
Yes. I mean, on the actual timeline, our final real goodbye was the night before, because the next morning when you see them, it's behind glass. There's a lot going on that day between the suit ups and all the prep. So we had said goodbye, but we still saw him several times. You see them do all these things, and then they get on this bus, and that's the last you see of them. And then we, myself with my kids and this small group of people that we brought with us, traveled to the viewing area. Which, because he launched in 2019, we were not yet launching from Florida. So all astronauts had to ride Russian rockets to get to and from the International Space Station up until 2020. And so we were in Kazakhstan on the other side of the world. That's where the Russians launched their rockets. And so we are standing in this field, really, if you can imagine, just kind of a desolate, kind of dry field, because it's the middle of the summer and the sun has just set. And there's no big countdown clocks. There's no blaring loudspeakers. It's just you looking at your watch, and that ground crew is going to launch that rocket, not 1 second earlier or 1 second later. And so standing there holding my kids' hands, it was kind of this holy moment, because and I've certainly never faced this before in my life. I know most people will not have this opportunity, but that in 10 seconds, this day is either going to be one of the most amazing, awe-inspiring, proud moments of your life, or you're going to become a widow. And you're going to do it holding your kids' hands with the world watching in real time along with you. And that's terrifying. It's emotionally overwhelming. It's kind of a physically overwhelming trip. And then as the rocket lights and you can feel it in the ground, and it's so bright and it's so loud. So it's really this emotional, overwhelming moment, plus the physicality of just watching this rocket light. And it's a completely overwhelming experience. And it's very scary. And in that moment where you're feeling this fear, I felt, God saying to me, this fear you're feeling, what are you going to do with this? Like, where do you find your solid footing? Where is your hope? Is your hope in whether or not this rocket launches successfully, or is your hope in me? Because the scary part about that launch is that either way it was going to go, and spoiler, it went well. It was a successful launch. But either way, whether it was good or bad, it was scary because there was all these unknowns at the end of either of those paths. Even if it was successful, which it was, we didn't know how it was going to affect our marriage, his relationship with our kids. I mean, 9 months is a very long time. We'd never parented children or been married to someone while they were orbiting the Earth before. There's all kinds of unknowns. I didn't know if I had the endurance to be, a good spouse and mom and coworker and friend, and all those things in that 9 months with everything going on. So all these unknowns. And God says to me, where is your hope? If your hope is in life going well, in this rocket being successful, in you being happily married, in being financially secure, all these things that we build our hope on, then there's a good chance that may not happen, right? And it's like, there's only one thing you can build your hope on, and that's me. And so I was faced with that, like in this real world moment of this launch, where I kind of had to make a decision in that moment. Where am I going to find my hope? And it was that would not matter on how this rocket launched or didn't. So I think a lot of people, though, have hit that same experience here in this pandemic. Like, as you realize what your hope is built on when that thing is taken away from you. And so I think a lot of the anger and the angst and just the fear we're feeling as a society and as a culture right now is because a lot of us have built our hope and put our faith in things that are changeable, whether that was, whatever that was, finances, economy, politics, your job, your marriage. And God says, all those things can be taken away from you. All those things can change. And during the pandemic, it did for a lot of people. And meanwhile, God is patiently saying to us over here on the side, like, let me offer you something different. Let me offer you an alternative, a foundation that is unmovable, unchangeable. And honestly, when you build your life on me, it reshuffles all those other priorities, your job, your marriage, your children, your finances, how you view community and vulnerability, and for all those things, it reshuffles all of those into their proper place. And now you can build a life that is unshakable, and you can kind of dissipate that fear that would otherwise overwhelm you.
So over that 9-month period of time, and I know this is kind of the main point of the book, is regarding how you changed, how God changed you. So if you had to summarize what was going on in your heart, I think you touched on it as you just talked about the immediate aftermath of Drew being launched into space. But how were you different 9 months later, just setting COVID aside, because that makes things different anyway? That whole scenario that we walked through, and in many situations still walking through. But how had you changed spiritually in that time period that God had really reserved for you?
Yeah, I think it really started at that moment where I decided, okay, I'm going to choose to hope in God. And that is not tied, that faith is not tied to my circumstances. It is tied to him. And then once that happened, and I returned home, from the launch trip and had to get on with life, a lot of these lessons that I had picked up over the years through deployments or just living life, they really were catalyzed in that season. And because I had decided to set my foundation, my hope in God, it allowed me to then take these lessons and apply them in a deeper and much more real way than I ever had in my life. So lessons about, finding authentic friends and not being afraid to be vulnerable with them and share when, I'm lonely, I'm tired, I need help. I don't know what I need, but I just need someone to talk to today. Or how to view connection with people, specifically like with my husband, when, what do you do in a season when connection just feels hard or, challenging? Do you just give up, or do you get creative and find new ways to do that? When you feel like you're in just survivor mode and you can feel it in your soul that you are not your best self, you are just surviving day to day, and that's not what God wants for you, but you're not sure kind of how to get out of it and how to rediscover some fun again and some purpose, and how even in hard times, things can still be good. It can be both hard and good at the same time. And we are given some freedom to figure out how to do that in our own life and the way our own families are. But because I had that foundation of like, this is what I'm going to build all the rest of these things on, then I was able to really lean into those other lessons in a new way. And it changed how I viewed friends. It changed how I viewed being vulnerable and being honest about my needs as a mom, as a friend. It changed how I view prioritizing staying connected to people, even when it's hard. Prioritize still having fun, even when life is hard. And that it's okay to say I'm having a hard time, but still find ways to have fun and connect with others, and look for and take the time to say, what is God trying to teach me in this season? He doesn't want me to just like survive and get up and work hard and then go right to bed and do it again the next day without ever pausing to say, what are you teaching me in this season? Because I do think hard seasons allow us some clarity that we can't find when things are easy. And whether that's just the clarity to say, my priorities are all in the wrong order, or this friend is not really a good friend to me, or I'm not trying as hard in this area of communicating with my spouse or my kids or my family the way I should be. So if nothing else, that clarity, I think, is a gift in hard times that we really can lean into and make the most of.